It's quite amusing how the government side constantly glorifies the idea that issues like gambling, drugs, and prostitution happen purely because of the lottery of birth, as if people never actually want and engage in them. But, ladies and gentlemen, the reality is far more complex. The root causes of these so-called victimless crimes are not that simple. We can just point fingers at the government without also acknowledging the individuals who willingly choose to take part in these activities. Two things to be proven in the debate. First, which one is more effective and dangerous? Also, which one is more unjustifiable? But before I go to my argument, I have several rebuttals toward the government side of the house. Firstly, the government side of the house always glorifies rehabilitation, but actually rehabilitation already exists in the current situation, even though we know that a lot of people has gone through that and go back and be accepted by the society. That's why the government side of the house argument filed. Secondly, the government side of the house also said that the law is unjust and can prevent the crime, but actually it will cause more crime and won't prevent the crime if we use the mechanism from the government side of the house, which I'll explain later in my first argument. Thirdly, to allocate the money from the fine into the rehabilitation, but again, the rehabilitation is still there and exists, but the punishment are still there and exist with different kinds of drug crime. Lastly, only criminalize the crime that is actually harmful towards the society, but again, yes, it's already happening, and we don't need to use the mechanism from the government side of the house. Now let's go to my argument. First, which one is more effective and also which one is more dangerous. What the government fails to acknowledge is that although they claim to address the root of the problem, they haven't actually explained it to who commits these so-called victims crimes or why. Let's start with prostitution. It's true that some individuals are pushed into sex work due to socioeconomic pressures or coercion. However, this is not the case for everyone. Many choose this line of work voluntarily as a way to earn a living. In fact, prostitution involves not just this profiting service, but also the seeking them often people with financial means, including government officials, that often are struggling or poor either. Some operate in relatively affluent areas, like in IKN, where the sex industry is supported by locals with decent economic backgrounds. People often engage in prostitution not out of desperation but because they want to earn more, especially when living away from home. Additionally, we must acknowledge cases where individuals are forced into prostitution through trafficking or abduction. In such instance, criminalizing and rating prostitution has become necessary to expose and stop human exploitation. This environment often hide trafficking crimes that would otherwise go unreported. Currently, the law focuses on punishing pimps and traffickers, not the sex workers themselves. If we move toward discrimination, it might create more dangerous knowledge. Furthermore, when prostitution is legalized or legalized, governments already provide support for those wishing to leave the trade, such as financial assistance for starting a new career. This shows that the current mechanism is in place are already sufficient there's no need for additional policy from the government side. Now let's consider gambling. It's misleading when the government side is gambling too poverty. Many gamblers are financially stable individuals, police officers, military personnel, or even government works. The syndicates sometimes use not just their personal income but also many obtained through extortion or corruption. If we stop criminalizing gambling, we risk greater financial losses for the country and injustice in society. As for drug us, the current system already differentiates between users and dealers. Users often get rehabilitation, not jail time. Only dealers or traffickers face imprisonment of harshest sentence. Not all drug users are addicts or in need of treatment. Some use casually and know how to control their consumption. So again, the government proposed changes unnecessary because existing systems are already functioning is instead. That is why the status quo is already effective and also safer to society. Now let's go to my second argument. Why at the end of the day is will injustice towards the people around the perpetrators. One reason a crime is punishable is because it causes harm to the victim. However, there are crimes where the perpetrator is also the victim. These types of crimes are called victimless crimes, also referred to as victimless crimes. They can still have significant negative impact on individuals and society. Furthermore, discriminating these acts can create the impression that such behavior is morally acceptable, which can encourage increased risk behavior in society. Victimless crimes still cause injustice to those around the perpetrator. Examples of these crimes included drug use, gambling, and other evils. While seemingly acceptable, these behaviors can damage social relationships, but those closest to them, and create new problems in society for those who don't participate in the consequence. In the end, it has an impact on those closest to him. For example, if the perpetrator gambles and loses all his money, then he borrows money from other people, even takes out an online loan, then he is irresponsible and leaves the debt. Then this has a very negative impact on the family because the party who is asked for the debt will continue to contact the closest people to borrow. Therefore, despite being called victimless crimes, their acts still have real and serious impacts on the perpetrators' social environment. The decision to decriminalize or allow these behaviors to go unhacked can worsen social, economic, and emotional conditions in society. It is crucial that we look beyond the legal perspective to consider moral values, social responsibility, and big long-term impact on families and communities. Collective awareness and waste regulation are needed to prevent the wider damage caused by victims' crimes. Thank you.